and I guess an exponent for vocal health. So I like people to be healthy and help people out. My specialism is in dealing with kind of pain conditions in brackets. So looking at people who are in pain without a necessary attributed pathology in their larynx. So if you've got unexplained laryngeal pain with no other red flags, then what is that and how can I help? So and that's basically why I started the Voice Care Centre, which is Europe's largest multidisciplinary centre for vocal health. So that's me. I don't think there's anything else. I think that's it. Yes.
Lovely. You know lots of stuff about the voice, and you express it beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Fountain of knowledge about the voice.
But don't ask me about horse riding or anything like that, because I only know about the voice. That's it. Nothing else I know about.
In the context of SOVT work.
Yeah.
Lydia, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. I'm Lydia Hart. I work with Stephen at the Voice Care Centre. Been there for coming up to a year now. And I am a speech and language therapist, and I specialise in voice and upper airway disorders. So it's sort of a clinical background, a clinical stance on the voice. But I'm a sort of a singer by background as well. And I really love the voice. I love performing. I love the anatomy. I love helping people, and kind of what we do as speech therapists is, generally speaking, work with people that are struggling with their voice in some way, be that a really severe dysphonia where they've completely lost their voice, or had, paralysis of the vocal cords, or, that kind of end of the spectrum. And then also working with singers like we do at the Voice Care Centre, singers and performers who are perhaps slightly struggling with the voice or recovering from a vocal injury. And that's quite a spectrum, as you might imagine, of different ways for working in the voice. And one of the things I'm most passionate about is kind of holistic care and well-being, and sort of looking after a person as a whole and seeing the voice as part of that person. And yeah, I think at the Voice Care Centre especially, we kind of really pride ourselves in having that holistic view of the voice and being able to sort of take care of people in that sense. So it's great.
And that's exactly why I immediately wanted to invite you two to this, because you know everything, and you've got, this is brilliant font of knowledge, but you're also really aware that you have to go inside out when you're approaching the voice, and your state of being is incredibly important as well. And I think that the straw actually, that some of the SOVT work ties it in quite nicely. And we'll talk about this, but I think it really ties it in because you're not so bothered about making a really good sound. Allow yourself to experience things, which is often quite freeing with those of us who've gone through vocal challenges. Oren is here.
Yay, Oren!
He's here, so I'm gonna let him in, and here we go.
Hi, Caroline in Belgium. I just saw your message.
Hello. This is the savior of the day. This is internet on demand.
Gosh, did your internet go down?
Yeah, Virgin Media is terrible. Just FYI.
Gosh.
Oh, good. I'm here.
Oh, take a breath. I'll just quickly introduce myself, and then while you take a take a seat, take a breath. I'm Rachel. I'm the founder of the Sing Space and a vocal coach. I think I also have the perspective of spending 10 years performing in the West End, and going through this from the singer's perspective myself. So I went to Arts Ed, and whilst at Arts Ed, I got nodules, and so the resulting kind of 10 years, it never leaves you mentally. So when I was performing, I was always, you know, battling with reflux and with nodules and with weird things as well that I, you know, that maybe I still, you know, won't know what they are. Just, you know, strange kind of inconsistencies, and it was terrifying. And no one mentioned straws to me during that time at all. No one mentioned, or any SOVT work, you know, any kind of, any lip drilled, but we didn't know why. And I think when you're in that state of uncertainty, it's really important to know why. You can't just sometimes say, don't blow some bubbles, or, you know, do this. You can't know why, because it means so much. You're going to go and sing in front of 1,000 people. You can't go on just hope alone. You have to have that. I feel like you've got to have that knowledge and the science to back it up. And so I went and started vocal coaching maybe 10 years, or like that 10 years ago. And I've been doing that exclusively since. And I use a lot of SOVT work, sometimes a straw, always, sometimes puffy cheeks, and sometimes lip trills. I run a vocal gym and do guided daily vocal workouts. And every Wednesday, it's Bring a Straw Day. So we're doing SOVT Wednesdays now for the last kind of 6 weeks or so. And we don't talk about the science on a Wednesday. We just get in and we spend half an hour looking at all the stuff we'll be talking about, from, you know, exploring all the potential with the straw. So that's me. I'll pass it. While I'm here, the structure of today is going to be, Oren's going to tell you a little bit about why it works after he's introduced himself. We're not going to spend long on that tonight because we've done that before. You can see some catch-up videos on the Sing Space. You can join our Facebook group, and we've got, Oren's been in twice talking about that. So I think we'll do a kind of a quick overview, but we're going to really look at applied SOVT today, how you can apply it to all those questions that you have, really specific notes, vowels, register breaks, tension. And we're just going to spend a bit of time really looking at how you can do that, how you can put it into your practice, and just a few kind of what not to do when you're doing it, and you know what to do. The Facebook group's just at the Sing Space, Ophelia. I know there's a Sing Space, so don't join them. They're a karaoke game. I might partner with them. So welcome, Oren.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I've crashed the party a bit late. I'll keep my introduction brief. Basically, I'm a SOVT enthusiast. I think is a nice way of phrasing it. Researcher. So my primary sort of research arms at the moment are to do with SOVT and working on developing devices that can assist in vocal maintenance and aid, and entrepreneur. So I love businessy stuff, and so for me, like, I truly believe in the pursuit of meaningful science. So everything that I do is to enrich lives through the arts and to have an impact on the universe, and then to take the science that we have learned along that journey and to use it for good. So I'm super excited to be here and to kind of have a chat about all things SOVT, because this is the stuff that I have been obsessing with for quite a while now.
So would you like to can you just talk us through a brief overview of what on earth it is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so SOVT in essence stands for semi-occluded vocal tract, which basically means that somewhere along the vocal tract, at some point above the vocal folds, there is some kind of closure or occlusion or restriction of airflow. And so I define two different types of SOVT, active and passive. And so active falls into the category of things like lip trills or fricatives or nasals, whereby we are actively trying to do something to create these restrictions of airflow. And then passive is using some kind of device, so like a straw that's external from the body, that you don't necessarily have to do any kinds of crazy internal manipulations to achieve the benefits from. And so that's kind of where my work principally falls, within straws and understanding tubular devices and how they impact the voice. And so if we're kind of looking from that perspective, they're really great at doing a couple of really useful physics things, sciencey things that reframe the system, just make it a little bit more efficient for the singer. And so kind of really briefly, what's happening then is as the air is moving outward of the body, this is typically the aperture that it moves out of. And when you put something like a straw in its place, you then change that aperture to whatever the diameter of the straw is. As a result of that, we pull into effect some really cool physics tricks. And there's a few things occurring here. And for anybody that's interested, I'll fire the names at you. And so we're dealing with Bernoulli's principle, we're dealing with Poissier's law, mass conservation of energy, and Pascal's law, all at the same time, all from just something as sillily simple as a straw. But the reason why it's so important, like, go and research these things because they're amazing. And it's basically each one of those components has a benefit that is directly associated with the straw. And so as air is moving through, we're restricting the amount of air that can escape. That energy has to do something. It's got to go somewhere. And so some of it, the air energy in terms of air and acoustic energy, gets reflected backwards down the vocal tract and re-interacts with the vocal folds from above. And so that whole process is what we call back pressure. And so that re-interaction, that recycling of that energy allows you to do a number of things at the vocal fold level. And so we get a rebalancing of those pressure systems. The vocal folds have to do less. So the loading of the vocal folds is lessened because of the effects of the recycled energy. We then also use these pressure systems to change the shaping and alignment of the vocal folds, posturing them more aerodynamically to be more complementary to the air. When we're using a straw, we lower and reposition the break, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in some detail, because I know everybody is like, okay, how do I smooth over my break? So straws are great for that. Yeah, that's kind of like an overview of straws and kind of what they do for the voice. But then, like, the secondary benefits of that then are things like it's easier to sing. You can use these effects to strengthen your voice. You can then use these to recover from tired and fatigued voices, creating a new pressure system to prevent some of the collisions of the vocal folds from being too impactful, allowing the vocal folds to vibrate more efficiently as a result. So there's lots of things that get pulled into the mix just as a result of using SOVT, which is why I think it's such a wonderful technique to be exploring. Is that all right? Is that like too much already? Sorry.
Just enough, Oren.
Yeah.
Cool.
You know, you find it every time.
I know.
It gets better and better. I think
I know.
is I'm gonna act as kind of devil's advocate today, I think, and I'm gonna kind of assume that the least amount of knowledge so that we can really get into this, because I think it took me about a year and a half of hearing this to start to absorb it. And I think that whilst that makes absolute sense, if you don't have the imagery or ahead potentially of the larynx and what's happening and where the vocal folds sit, because when I was singing, I didn't have that imagery. It's not as easy to visualize, and I've been trying to kind of come up with ways of just feeling, just understanding what would happen if you have two pressures coming at each other that are equal, and then two things that are coming together, and that idea of alignment. And I think that that's the thing, as you approach this, we've got to have that visualization, haven't we, of that kind of unidirectional air going one way, passing through something which could potentially open up with too much pressure. If you get that back pressure to equalize, it's cushioned. It's almost like I don't know whether we can kind of play around as we go tonight with some imageries to find that, because I haven't quite got one yet. I thought about
I've got one.
Go on.
I don't think it's quite representative of that. I'll tell it to you anyway, and we can make judgment. But basically, the best thing that I could come up with in terms of how these pressure systems work is imagine those really fancy soft close kitchen cabinets that like you can slam them as hard as you possibly want, but at some point they'll reach this area where they get buffered, and then it's just like and then it's just nice and smooth and gentle.
That's great.
So that's one
great.
I've come up with, but
and I
I'm
guess
sure there's more.
That's like why you can never belt a lip trill, isn't it? No matter how hard you try, no matter how much subglottic pressure you chuck at your folds, you're not going to create that belted, huge, massive sound.
But that's quite an interesting one, because you can't create it at vocal fold level in like that way of creating a belt, but which forces you, because if you're trying to tonally make a belt, it really forces you to use your shaping of your vocal tract to boost the harmonics instead. So because with SOVT work, you can't get that same kind of idea and the same kind of approach. You end up doing really kind of lowering kind of things with your tongue and trying to open up some of the bass in other ways. So I think it can be quite interesting. We'll get into that, of using other ways of creating belt or faking belt or creating the same sound.
Yeah, I mean, how much do you want to dive into this now? Because I have some thoughts on like creating a pseudo setup for belt that obviously you're not going to be making belt sounds through SOVT, but you can generate setups that I think are going to assist when you do come to make belted sounds.
Yeah, and the terminology, we just kind of a disclaimer here. Terminology, it drives us, it's all language. Belt might mean one thing, belt to Stephen might mean something else, belt to Stephen might mean something else. You've all got your different interpretation of belt, and we just have to be really careful, don't we, with all of this. Anything we say, mix, belt, tilt. As Stephen said, helpful lies, right? They're all just
well, I guess it's just about what story you're telling when and to who, isn't it? Because if I'm trying to get any kind of chest quality out of a choral singer, I might say, "Can you belt that out for me?" And they'll go, "Oh yes, I will." and not stereotyping choral singers again for one moment, but it's that thing. Whereas if you're dealing with a seasoned CCM singer, who belts every day for a living, then belt becomes a whole spectrum of the kind of Dulux color chart, doesn't it?
Yeah. If we call it a really full, powerful sound that has some relationship with your speaking tone, so it's familiar to your authentic voice. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? It's easier just to say, "Can you belt it?"
Oren, I'd love to hear those setups, man. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So they kind of stem from thinking about the impact of the physics across a tubular device in different configurations, and then what effects that has. So naturally, a straw is going to generate a greater sense of forward placement, just because the sound is having to be directed in that fashion through the straw, which is a nice little bonus. But it's one of those things where, because of the effect of Pascal's law, and so for those of you who don't know, very quickly, Pascal's law is any change to a pressure system is going to propagate across the entirety of that pressure system equally. So that then means if you increase the pressure in one part of the system, it is going to have an effect across all of it. And so when we increase the resistance, then we increase the pressure. And so actually we're creating a slight widening of the vocal tract as a result, which is potentially more accommodating to the sounds that we want to be making when we're belting. The other thing we then need to think about is, we want to create an environment where we get maximum efficiency of closure of the vocal folds, so we can keep them closed for longer. And so we want to then think about a slightly, again, higher resistance setting, because that higher resistance is going to give more adjustments to the top of the vocal folds to help us create that environment that we need. And so for me, when you're looking at kind of straw work, I want to get a good amount of pressure propagation to just give these vocal tract spaces a little bit more room, but also enough that we bring the vocal folds into closure. So I would principally do with water. The reason for that decision is because the effect the water has in rapidly switching between these pressure systems. And so, again, if we think about as this pressure is expanding equally, if we're then going from essentially this to this, to this, to this, to this, to this, to this, that is having a propagating effect each time those bubbles are escaping. And so we're just allowing the internal vocal tract spaces to be a little bit more accustomed and freer to opening and restricting. So we're kind of a little bit more in tune with what we want naturally out of these spaces. And then as a result of those pressure systems and those changes, we're just allowing a greater variety of this push-pull interaction at the top of the vocal folds. So we're just allowing them to come together with a greater sense of ease than if we were to do it with just out into air. And then the resistance factor of that is you want to match glottal impedance, and that is the hardest thing to do. So if we match glottal impedance, we're going to be providing the vocal folds with an equally balanced system, which will allow them the most efficient phonatory setup. If we have a mismatch of glottal impedance, let's say we're applying too much back pressure, then the task then becomes slightly more towards we're now providing too much above the vocal folds than below. If we have too little, we then fall into the trap of the vocal folds are taking too much of that loading themselves, so it's not fully balanced. So
Go on. How do we do this?
How do we match glottal impedance? Well, at the moment, it is very much about... Okay, so you can only do it objectively with some kind of reading, so some kind of a device that can tell you what the pressure systems are in relation to the airflow, and you can calculate what the glottal impedance is. That's the best way to do it. Naturally, not everybody has such a device. So the way I do it is when I work with students, we work through a range of different resistance options, and we kind of narrow it down to something that feels comfortable. And I like using the word comfortable because if we have too much resistance, we can feel the effect. It might not be uncomfortable to a massive degree, but it won't necessarily be in that kind of sweet spot of, yeah, I'm fine feeling these sensations, they're not too obtrusive. If we have too little resistance, we then fall into it's just too easy and I'm not really feeling anything at all. So we just range through a bunch of different resistance options until we find that comfortable sweet spot.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
So I get asked quite a lot when I do, each week when we talk about SOVT work, and I often say, I often share links to your straw, and occasionally someone comments, it's just a straw by a straw. And that's exactly what I love is the amount of time that's gone into why this is, the straw's designed. I don't think you would have had the passion just to design a pretty straw just to make money. In fact, this has the ability to change so many lengths, and to change diameter as well, and pressure, depending on which way you're facing it. It means that you can play around with this. And I think what's really beautiful is what you're saying is something that I think is really crucial, which is vocalizing should feel pleasurable, not just easy. It should feel nice.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of going, oh, how deep in the water should it be? When you're trying these areas, whether you're working through tricky parts of the song or the belt, trust yourself as singers to go, does this feel good? like, and test around. And as you're saying, because it's quite, we don't want it to be too theoretical to go, well, how much resistance, how little resistance? Just play around and find that place where it feels really comfortable.
Yes.
So is that right, that it should just...
Yeah. So yes, I mean, the kicker to that is pitch is going to change where that comfortable level lies in relation to the resistance. So as we increase in pitch, the resistance might need to increase to try and rebalance and to give you that comfort zone again. So it's about finding, I suppose, your range of comfort across a range of resistances relative to the pitches that you'll be working at. And I think that's the most difficult thing, because it's very much about you being in tune with your own body and what you feel as a singer, which you can then apply to the tasks that you want to do. Obviously, that whole process becomes a ton easier when you have data to objectively say, okay, I can now see that I am producing, I don't know, 2.5 kilopascals of glottal impedance or whatever. And then it's like, okay, and I know I need to be at 2. So, you know, you can rebalance it that way, but we're not quite there yet in terms of the technology and the science to be able to do that. So it's very much about being in tune with the body, feeling what's going on, being comfortable.
Because what you're saying is, you're talking again about things that can often be quite ambiguous. We're using words like bells and changing the shape of your vocal tract. And again, this stuff, you're not usually that aware of that always. But when you've suddenly got your whole mouth filled with a back pressure of sound waves, you know, you have much more of this, you've in the added proprioception, the whole area, and suddenly you feel that width, which is helping you with that belt, and you can then translate that. There's a lot of questions coming up about how to translate it into your singing. It's an awareness tool. So when we're doing one of these things, it's about targeting your awareness to what's happening, so that your brain and your body can start to build these kind of connections. And then you can either translate it into your singing and try and, you know, maybe use some of those sensations you found. Or I think the second thing that you're saying is that just by doing it, you'll start to see the benefits, like a workout in the gym, that even if you don't, you just, you know, by doing it, it's also helping. Yes,
exactly. It's exactly that gym analogy, right? It's the more you condition the body for the task that you want to do, the better the body is going to be at producing or reproducing that task. I suppose the other really important factor of this kind of biovisual proprioceptive feedback combo is that when you are doing it with water, you now have the unique ability to visually see the airflow, which gives you the option to manage exactly what's going on. You know, if the bubbles are eruptive, and by eruptive I mean they're like splashing up everywhere, there's probably too much airflow, you're probably doing too much. The sound is probably a little bit too pressed. If the bubbles are inconsistently kind of, you know, they're there and sometimes they're not, they're there and sometimes they're not, that's a good indicator of there's too little airflow. And so you now have this tool that you can go, right, okay, I can see exactly what the body is outputting. What do I need in terms of airflow for the pitch or the task that I want to do? And then you can try and replicate a setup that does just that. So there's the way you configure things, you get so many different benefits. So there's straws, there's just so much to it. It's crazy.
I think we'll go through some of the questions now. Before we start, is it true that I always think of the vocal folds must be getting a kind of massage as well, because of the vibrations are going back through the muscles and ligaments. They must be getting a lovely little, you know.
Yes, so you get a couple of benefits from that, and maybe I'm not the most qualified here to talk about that, but from like the physics perspective, you're getting acoustic energy being recycled, and naturally we know acoustic energy is just vibrations of air molecules, so that's going to assist in vibrating the internal surfaces. But then also when you do it with water, like I said before, you get the effect of these pressure systems interchanging, which is going to expand and contract the internal surfaces that acts as like a massage. So yeah,
I was just going to jump in there and say that Johann Sundberg's Science of the Singing Voice. I think it's page 87, but don't quote me.
I will quote you.
He says that we can't give the vocal folds a massage because they're too far down. So the only way in which we can get a massaged effect is through occluded vocal tract work. So there we are. I just thought I might just check that whilst you guys are doing. I think it's page 87, but now that I've said that, I'm thinking it might be 84. But I'll let you know.
Your memory is too good.
Will I go through some of the questions?
Yeah.
Great ones. I'm going to start with the chat just because it's, I know at the beginning people were putting them on there. So yes, it was. We talked a bit about best SOVT sound for long notes. I'm just going to read it. Long note bashy sessions when you have neighbors. I mean, that's the great thing, right? Any SOVT is great when you have neighbors. You know, I think we can go into some alternatives to the straw as well. Things you can do if you don't have a straw. There's lots of lovely hellos in here. When releasing tension in the voice, I had MTD and left vocal fold
paresis, different to a paralysis.
Which is now healed. Okay, panics about hurting her voice, and her voice feels really dry and gets hoarse after about an hour of singing. Can you give me any advice on helping to prolong my singing and release the tension? Now, I had a lesson with Kay, and actually she found, you found that you were using a straw is the only method at the moment that doesn't give you tension. Even the trill was. And we were just, so, you know, it was only the straw that was comfortable. I don't know, Kay, if it's still been comfortable in the few days that has followed.
Fascinating. And I think that sort of ties in with the active versus passive thing that you were talking about, Oren, with where you're doing the semi-occluded vocal tract, and actually somebody who's recovering from a vocal injury, muscle tension, dysphonia, by default is used to excessive muscle tension and pushing and squeezing in the larynx when trying to phonate. And so actually by doing an active SOVT like a trill, perhaps that on its own isn't going to unpick those those patterns of muscle tension. Whereas once you put the straw in there, and like we've been saying, actually you just allow everything else to relax because you're not having to actively do any work. And with the air kind of cushioning and the widening effect, that's why I use it so much with my patients with muscle tension dysphonia, because it is so effective at releasing everything out and then recalibrating what is essentially a slightly dysfunctioning system. It just helps rebalance it.
And is there anything to watch out for, lip tension, jaw tension, tongue tension when you're using the straw? Tongue root tension, I've heard, can be...
Yeah, I would be careful to be mindful of how you're holding the straw. It's some people like to bite onto the straw and hold it with their teeth, which is okay. You don't want to be biting too hard because, in doing so, you're going to be pulling in some muscles that potentially you don't want to be pulling in. Equally, if you're holding the straw in your lips, and like if you're just holding it there with just your lips and you're not actually holding it, then the lips are going to have to be tensioning to accommodate and keep that straw in position, which again is not ideal. So I would just advise holding the thing that you're working with, gently place it where you want it to be placed. Let the lips accommodate it enough that you get a good enough seal so no air can escape, but not so much that you're bringing the lips taut to kind of like really secure it. That's what I would say about that.
And just be aware of your tongue as well. Just be aware that it's just that it's not over activating, because you can just bring your fingers to your jaw as well, can't you, as you're doing it, and just check everything's staying nice and relaxed. I also tried to often get singers to hold their nose while they're doing it. They haven't replaced their nose. Yeah,
that's so important. I get a lot of people that think it's like the easiest thing in the world, and I'm like, okay, can we just check the nose? And then obviously the sound stops, and it's because the air is escaping through their nose and completely bypassing the straw, which is not what we want. So yes, that is a really good point to have people check that when they're phonating through the straw. If you pinch and unpinch your nose and the sound pretty much doesn't change at all, then you're golden. If it does cut off or change drastically, then we've probably got air leaking through the nose that we need to go and accommodate.
Brilliant. Can I ask Stephen, can I ask you to answer the question about register breaks just before we do it? Just kind of talking, because I think you're, as I say, you're so poetic with your articulation of anatomy. I think that you'll explain it much better than I will. Just what to TACT, what's kind of going on with head chest mix? Let's take the lingo out and let's just look at what's actually happening.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got, in terms of register, we've got kind of a divide between what is going on laryngeally at a mechanical level, and then what's going on, at a supralaryngeal level in a kind of an acoustic energy sense. So there are 4 vocal registers. Hollian, who was a speech therapist, coined them in 1984. So creak, which is mode 1, which is what I'm talking in now. Mode 2, which is that kind of, headier. And then mode 3, which is whistle. Okay. Now, yeah, you didn't think I could do it, did you? But I did. I was like,
is he gonna get it?
Well, those 3 laryngeal mechanical registers all have different shapes and configurations to the vocal folds and this kind of compression space in the larynx. Acoustic registers take place above that, but interact with the mechanical. Okay, so when we're looking at any kind of register break, it's like, what's the vowel, and then what laryngeal register are you aiming for? Because if I do an E in mode 2, E, 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 then fine, that has its own mechanical register, but it also has its own acoustic register. Because if I go from E to an O, E, O, the sound thickens up, but I'm still on the same pitch. So then we have a dynamic interplay between what Oren was talking about, the kind of reactive inertance, that energy above the vocal folds. When we add a straw to this, as far as I'm aware, I'm going to quote Boyle's law, if I may. Well, Boyle has many laws, but his second law, I believe, which is pressure and volume, pressure and volume. So whatever we're doing in terms of what's going out, whatever volume is happening, whatever volume and pressure is occurring above versus below, if we can balance those, we're going to create greater consistency along any change that we're trying to implement. Have I kind of said that right, Oren?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you've got then the straw and you're thinking about, okay, well, I want to change from chest to head with greater ease, start vocalizing with the straw, but maybe first of all, imagine the vowel that you're going to sing. So if it's, I'll use the on those summer nights, yeah, from Greece, right? So I don't know why that came into my head, it just did. So I would be then thinking about the kind of the diphthongy vowel of I would do the summer on the, but the mechanical configuration is going chest to head, but my acoustic configuration is staying in that vowel. I would then vocalize and then change the pressure accordingly, I guess, particularly with Oren's brilliant invention. It's funny. I was just on the phone to my mum. You're doing a thing with a guy who invented a straw, and I'm going, you have to see the straw, Mum.
It's yeah.
Have I said that right, Oren? Would you kind of agree with me on that?
Yeah. I would. You also get the added benefit when you're dealing with register breaks and straws of the kind of repositioning of where those notes will fall acoustically, which is it's basically it is what you've said, but you can adjust where they fall depending on the length of the tube that you're using,
Right.
because you're creating more or less resonating spaces. So you're extending the vocal tract additional degrees.
So if I was to take that example, those summer nights, then I would want to start perhaps with a longer configuration because I'm moving chest to head, but I don't want to lose the boost in. I don't want it to go summer night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so can we break this down for singers and try and took a couple of things from this, and it's complex because again you're having to try and imagine this as you talk as well, and it's so beautifully put, but there's so much going on in there, so much information that we're hearing. So one of the first things I found quite exciting is that what we're saying really is that all singing is SOVT. That what we're saying is this is highlighting pressure management, but take away the straw, take away the lip trill, and we're always bouncing back different acoustic pressures. And once we felt it with a straw and felt that balance, we can then start to feel it more readily when we're doing vowel work. And so I think that we have to accept that singing is always about using pressure management, and this opens the door. This is like singing pressure management. And then the other thing I was thinking is there's so much complexity. Like, yes, you've got chest and head, but I think you would agree that you're very rarely just in chest or just in head. There's a lot of middle ground. But obsessing over these things, very rarely, even if you're trying to give very intelligent commands to your voice, the voice doesn't respond very well often to commands. It interprets them really differently and does something else, because we don't have much control over it. I mean, Stephen said himself that you discarded the CT muscles, was it, in the lab because they're so small. So anyone who thinks now I'm just going to lengthen my CT muscles and do that and thinks they can do that, it's very unlikely that that command in itself is just do that. Something else is probably going to happen. And while stressing over going into your mix or your head or your belt and fixating on it, you may well be doing something else like holding your breath because you're getting a bit tense, or over doing adding some muscle in. So basically we're not very good at like giving ourselves very good commands on singing. Vocalizing is a response, really. When it's ideal, it's just kind of happening as a response to what we hear. Yet with a straw, you do those, I'm trying to articulate this, but you can do it, you can go through those areas and you can feel what's happening.
Yeah, because it adds a kind of proprioceptive awareness that is about the reaction rather than the stimulus. Because I think, you know, the trouble is because voice is reactive, and we know this because, you know, everybody can make a belty sound if they see somebody, you know, about to be, you know, run over by traffic or something, and you go, hey, and that just comes to you naturally. That's not a thing that anybody needs to teach you. You're not going to go, hey, you're not going to do it. And I think that then the straw gives us a way in which we can start to configure those things that come to us in that way. We start to be able to feel the unfeelable.
Yeah. I think as well that it's then back to the argument of what's instinctive and what is the brain just getting too involved in a process that it doesn't necessarily need to be too involved in, and obviously overthinking the task that we're doing. Humans, go on, sorry.
No, you go.
Well, I was going to say humans are tremendously good at overthinking things, and so, you know, if we do that to a degree, then you reach the situation of, okay, I've got the next note coming up, and I know it's a bigger note, I know it's a higher pitch note. What if I don't get the pitch? If I don't get the pitch, and you're just creating this environment that predisposes you to not doing the thing that you need to be doing. Whereas if you let it just be a little bit more instinctive and trust the processes to do what they need to do, then you'll be able to, in sort of a backwards way, I think you'll have more control over what you want to be doing.
Yeah, and that's why it's so useful as well as a clinical tool, because the larynx is no longer doing what we want it to be doing naturally. It's doing all sorts of other funny things, and so using the straw or other SOVT, it's just a gateway to actually getting rid of all of those things that the brain and the body and the muscles are habitually doing, and just kind of stripping that back and reminding the larynx and reminding the person how it should work naturally. And then once you've established that with the straw, then you step away from it and kind of do graded tasks, when I'm working with people towards getting their normal speaking voice back, or if actually you're working with a singer on a song, actually doing it with the words rather than just through the straw.
So you're putting it in an optimum setup, and you're doing it until your body relearns the optimum setup.
Yeah.
You do the setup with awareness. So as you're doing it, you close your eyes, maybe you tune into the sensations, you research the science behind what's happening, and you feel that idea of, the larynx being stabilized, maybe, and you do it with awareness. That will translate into your singing. And it's very hard to have a register break with a straw. I mean, I almost cannot make this break when I'm doing it through a straw, because you've got such this equalizing pressure. The vocal folds just stay aligned, don't they? And then, as I say, we go back to, you end up shaping to try and create different tones. You can go all the way through your range, but because you're trying to retain that kind of bassier sound, you find yourself learning to do other things with acoustic shaping, changing your tongue shape or opening up new width in the back of your mouth.
I just want to jump in here. I'm just reading some of the comments. I don't think there's any such thing as, just from what we're talking about here, about the ideal exercises for the straw. And I just want to kind of drop in here that the philosophy of the straw work is the most important thing. It's that working in the most comfortable range. It's about, you can take a straw, or please take orange straw because it's actually the best thing. That then you take that and you work on your songs with that in the most comfortable way, which is finding an occlusion to your work, which when you take that straw away, you still feel that there's some of that work retained. It's not necessarily about the exercises per se, not in the general sense, and it's in that philosophical sense that once you start to understand the principles of the work, it then becomes about increasing your whole singing rather than just dedicating time to doing some SOVT exercises.
And it relates to everything else we're doing. Like, the SOVT work is a tool to be able to have awareness of certain aspects of your vocal system. In the same way that I'll use a whoa, whoa, whoa a lot to give people a heightened awareness of extreme tilt, again, like or you'll use a hey to give a setup of a certain width, and we don't do them. People say, well, how do you translate that into your singing? But these are all tools to highlight a certain...
It's a training tool. Yeah. Like doing something at the gym and then being more aware of what your shoulder's doing in other tasks, because you've increased your awareness of what it feels like to work the shoulder.
Yeah, and I would say if you're one of those people that wants to have kind of that immediate work and then response, then a method that probably would work better for you would be to, do some SOVT work on just, let's say, a 1-3-5-3-1 pattern, bog standard, broad. Do it through the straw, then immediately after pull in a vowel sound, then do it through the straw, then immediately after pull in a different vowel sound, do it through the straw. And then you can begin to expand into normal phonatory tasks. So it gives you that sense of kind of having a little bit more of those connected dots, as opposed to just kind of taking it on faith that it does the thing that you want it to do, if that kind of makes sense.
And that's very much how I have to use it when I'm working with people and sort of restoring a speaking voice. And I can get lovely phonation through the straw, but then they're still dysphonic when they're talking. And so you have to, exactly in the same way, join those dots up. And so I'll go from doing the straw phonation to maybe a hum, and then go through kind of my standard humming, chanting voice exercises, and then into the speaking voice from there. But for some patients, I have to start with the straw phonation because that's the only way I actually get a deconstricted vibration of the vocal cords without the tension coming in, and then you just build up from it.
Yeah. To add on to that as well, some friends of mine, most people probably know them, Dr. Vox, Dr. Ilter. They have this, which is a mask essentially, in which you can put over your face, but we're working with them at the moment, and so we've created an adapter, and this isn't a product that is on the market. It doesn't exist in any form other than from my 3D printer, but what it allows you to do is this, and so you can do those very same exercises, but now you get the benefit of being able to articulate fully whilst getting the benefits of straw phonation. I don't know if you heard any of that. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
Oren, can I just say, like, when I first met you, the first thing you said was, you were doing something, and I was like, "What's that there?" And you were like, "Oh, it's my turbine thing that I 3D printed." And then you,
this, all of this.
I love that.
I've taken it apart.
Your peak flow coordinator, and you're awesome.
It's amazing. That's how that is that, and it's it. When you're pressing your belt, you get that on as well, so you can actually open your mouth.
Yeah, which is why I mentioned it, because it has that extra kind of gap bridging between, yes, you can do straw phonation to get this really efficient environment. You can then take that environment and phonate normally. But if people are struggling to have something in the middle, you can use a setup like this that allows you to articulate and phonate normally while still getting the benefits of some straw phonation. So it's yeah.
I think that's those little stepping stones away. Stephen, you again talked so beautifully about retaining information as well, and the myelination that occurs around the pathways and the little holes in between where you lose the heat. And I think just if you've just done it and then you go into singing, you retain that information just then. You're singing your song, you blow it through a straw, you sing the whole thing, She Used to Be Mine, blow the whole thing, then sing it, but keep the straw kind of there, and when it starts to go again, blow a phrase, go back to the song, blow a phrase. When it's starting to feel tight again, go back to the straw. I find holding the straw there reminds me, it's something, it triggers the body memory as well. So even just holding it there kind of reminds me, keep breathing out, keep that jaw released, you don't need it here, feel that resonant engagement. It just kind of triggers those awarenesses that you've set up already.
And the way the way in which we increase our myelin and really kind of incubate those pathways is and not lose that vital information is through play as well. And so it again, why I'm kind of addressing that whole thing, you can have, I think even Oren does a load of recorded exercises, is that right? You've got
yeah. There's a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of stuff readily available on YouTube that you can access that we've done in collaboration with people. But with the purchase of the straw, there's about an hour's worth of content that's exercises, tutorials, all of that kind of good stuff.
So all of that stuff that you can get, so you can get your head around it. But the real learning takes place through play once you've got your head around it. So it's like stage 2 learning, which is that kind of cementing of the pathways. It comes from that sense of play. Okay, I'm doing this, and then la 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 la, and then do, and then a bit more la 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 la, and then you're there. You're a brilliant singer, much like my good self.
I'm still very impressed with that straight up whistle.
Yeah, from nowhere. I haven't even sung today. It's right there.
Reading some of the questions here. We've got
I was just having a quick look in the Q&A. There's one from Caroline, sorry if I've mispronounced that, who's also a speech therapist, and she just asked if there's any client groups in particular that this is useful for. And I'd say it's sort of, I've used probably straw phonation with all client groups, but it very much depends on the client themselves. And as a speech therapist, you always have to tailor your work to the client themselves. But as a general rule, this is super useful for anyone with excessive muscle tension or constriction, or anyone who is struggling to coordinate the muscles of the larynx. We sometimes have sort of functional voice disorders that we see, and it's not so much about tension, it's just about poor coordination of the system. Nodules, I know you mentioned at the beginning, Rachel, and I loved what you were saying, Oren. I'm going to remember this about slamming the kitchen drawers, which in nodules, that's what's happening all the time with the vocal cords, and actually putting that soft close on. So nodules especially, and actually anyone post-operative, again, depending on the person, but I often use emphasis on gentle straw phonation as one of the first vocal exercises I do with somebody who's had surgery on the larynx. So very broad reaching.
One of my clients just WhatsApped me. They're in the room, and they put, kitchen tantrums just aren't the same with soft close covered doors.
The puffy cheeks question, I'm going to just answer in that I've heard. I think it's okay to play around with it in the same way you would with different lengths and water. If you want to puff your cheeks out, it adds a bit more resistance, doesn't it? For me, it helps because I have quite a small jaw, and I'm someone who I really need to it helps me to feel more space between my wisdom teeth. I'm naturally quite clenched, so to puff my cheeks out really helps me relax. I think Tiffany, did you ask about jaw tension? I think you did. So I think for you, potentially puffing out the cheeks may work well, feeling that space between your wisdom teeth. I also think that the puffy cheeks is a beautiful SOVT exercise
on its own. I use it as well, and it's a nice step between. I often say to my clients, you know, like we're using a tool and we need to gradually step away from that tool, and puffy cheeks, humming are all nice steps away from that kind of, this is our scaffolding, and then we slowly remove it, but maintaining the changes that we've created inside the larynx.
And then you can even do a bit of opening, so going your blah 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 blah. So you're almost setting up the resistance and then letting it open up. So you start to get slightly closer to actually singing or to words.
Which actually in itself is quite good, because you're rapidly moving between pressure environments. So in doing that, it's probably not going to be close to the degrees that using straw and water would be, but you're probably going to start to pull in just some additional expansion and contraction of spaces as you move across the expansion and contraction of the lips.
And like also, let's just say it how it is again. Is SOVT. Almost every consonant is SOVT. You hit an N, you're probably, you're changing the pressure resistance. You're moving between vowels, you're constantly changing the pressure. And so the more that you can be familiar with it, the better. I mean, adding a little silent ooh before your W can be SOVT. When we're talking about changing it in using this in a song. If you hit, your where, instead of hitting a W, you hit the where. You won't hear it. No one listening will go, they just said it where. They didn't. You don't hear it, but going where and adding that ooh in first is going to give you that second of back pressure. You can do it before, we, and adding that little ooh. I also do it in R's. Instead of hitting a R, instead of singing rabbit, you can almost sing rabbit. And you won't hear it. Rabbit. And when you hit the ooh,
rabbit.
Yeah.
Can I
really
good tip.
Can I pick up on a question that's piqued my interest? If I click answer live, is that okay? You would like to answer this question live? Great. I'm answering the question here. Look at that. Georgia Fish said, can you talk about long notes and then added vibrato with using the straw to keep the strength of a note but safely? I find this. I love vibrato. I think vibrato is a mystical thing that kind of we get, but we don't really get. You know, when we are phonating, there's no such thing as a held note. Not really, because if we're holding a note, we're actually changing so much around the physics of that there's nothing fixed about it. Our whole rib cage is changing, the diaphragm is changing, our vocal tract is changing, our vocal folds are changing, and it's a wonder we can sing, to be honest. Now, with adding the vibrato, I was just thinking about this, and I've got a question for Oren specifically in this. Can we train vibrato more effectively, experientially this is, can we train vibrato more effectively when you know, that kind of off of the long note, because we're balancing the pressure better?
Yeah. So what we're kind of looking for when we do any kind of task like this is we isolate the task, and then we look at the components that build that task, and then find a configuration that would complement that. So if we're then saying, so how are we gonna, for the people out here that don't know, what are we classifying as the components of vibrato? Because then we can pull that all in and build a configuration around it.
I guess
it's so tough, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of the point.
well, I guess
you
can't vibrate on a tense larynx. So there has to be optimum flow for your laryngeal setup. Experientially, I can't vibrate on full thick mass. I can't. I can't get that. I can't
you have
get
to come
that.
off it.
I have to back off of it in order to get that vib. Maybe that's just because I'm not very good. But I think there's something about kind of adding a more optimum flow to the space. Or I see your cogs turning.
Sorry, yeah. I'm thinking. So based on that, just at the moment, I think one of the most efficient tools to be using, or efficient setups to be using, would be to work with some water to begin with, but I want to deviate. So to start working with some water, just to give you that visual representation of the airflow to manage that more appropriately. The thing with straw phonation in general is it generates, in principle, a more mixed setup.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm going to say that very quickly and then discard the M word. So what we're then thinking about is how do we make it so we create an environment that gives us the closure that we need as well. So definitely with water to manage the airflow, you want to make sure that the sound that's propagating, and this I guess is experience based, the sound that's propagating in this vessel it will sound a little bit distorted because obviously the sound is essentially coming from underwater, but you want it to have a sense of wobble. And I say wobble because it's not going to be vibrato yet, but it's going to have a little bit of wobble. And that is more to do with how that sound is moving across those pressure systems. And then once you've kind of found how that feels with that wobble in that water, take the straw out of the water and take I don't have any here. Take a piece of paper, and you kind of want to blow towards the corner of the piece of paper so that the corner just ever so slightly flutters.
Yeah.
And you want to use that to visually represent the airflow from there.
Sure, yeah.
And use that as your marker of how much air you're putting into the sound, so you're making sure you manage it for the vibrato. Does that sort of make any
Yeah,
sense?
no. I get you. I get you. Because essentially what you're doing is you're changing you're using the vibrato as the symptom that you want to change.
Yeah.
The thing, instead of it being I want to change my register, or my register adaptability or whatever, it's about can I change the oscillatory components of my voice.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I think coming off of all of that is we're naturally stabilizing the entire system more when we use straw phonation and SOVT, and so the larynx is going to be more stable as a result. So for me, everything that I do with straw phonation is about taking the task, specifically the task that you want to look at, breaking that down into its component parts, and then rebuilding it in a configuration that is optimal for straw phonation. I made where's it gone? I made this absurdity, which is every component that affects the way the vocal folds vibrate, what effects that has then on the voice, whether, so vocal fold length, whether it's short or long, compression through thick or thin, larynx position, all of the vowel sounds associated with those components, all of the consonant sounds associated with those components. And so essentially, for me, everything is like formulaic. That's the task. Okay, how do I achieve that task? If I need to change vocal fold compression, I track that back and I go, okay, this sound or this thing or this consonant or this is going to do the work that we need. And then we build an exercise to do that. So, that sort of went on a little bit of a tangent, but very broadly, in water, I would say actually probably deeper is better in water, just so you get a bit more of that resonance in the bottle or glass itself. The paper trick is really nice.
I love that. I've never used that. That's new to me. That's cool.
Yeah, I've got a tiny little bit of paper. It's like you really want to aim for like the corner. You're not going to move the paper if you hit the middle. Like it's not going to do very much. But if you aim for the corner,
oh yeah, look at that.
You can see a good amount of movement. So it's a nice little extra, because obviously the bubbles are great, but it's very hard to, like, on a smaller scale, see if they're stable. Because obviously, by virtue of the bubbles, they are inconsistent. Whereas with this, you can see that, if it's remaining bent, the airflow is stable. If it's unbending too much, then it's inconsistent, and so it's quite a nice little marker.
Can I steal that configuration sheet?
Steal everything. Steal it all.
Brilliant.
All theoretical as well. I don't actually know if any of that's going to work. But that's the whole thing, isn't it? It's about you have to test it. We have to try it with the person that we're working with, to see if it works for them.
It's not a quick fix, is it? It's not like blow with a straw for one day and it's going to be magic here. It's something to incorporate into your regime and your lifelong journey with your voice. Because your voice is going to change as you get older. When you're under the weather, when you're hormonal, you'll need a different resistance. People are asking for specifics here, and that's the thing, is we just keep going, keep playing with it. It'll be different on different days. Can I just ask about this whole you can't belt on a lip trill thing, and you can't? So can we not do? Is it because past a certain point, it has to, the CT has to come into play? So it's basically telling us that there's a ceiling. That's why we have a ceiling. That's why you can't use that kind of full whack sound past a certain point. So it's telling us when it's kind of reaffirming that it's healthier to blend.
Well, in terms of laryngeal anatomy, I think it's probably less to do with the CT and actually more to do with the interaction of the lateral and posterior cricoarytenoids, which are going to be stabilizing the position of the arytenoids for that phonation at the back. Now, I think the CT has a part of it, but I think it's much more of a complex dance in that way of pressure. It's much less binary. I think is the way I would describe it. And yeah, I think because of the addition of all that, I think that's probably why it's not going to get into that really big slap and wiggle sound. As well, I guess there's that acoustic component. I don't know. I have never been able to belt on a lip drill. Have you?
I think so.
It's also, if we consider as well,
The same. I think
it's the aperture. I think it's the aperture that's the issue. In the consider like what we're doing when we're belting, the mouth isn't as restricted as that, and so we're not letting all of that acoustic energy escape, and so some of that acoustic energy is going to be coming backwards, which might cause the issue. If you could probably belt using the mask with a straw, for instance, because the aperture is going to be natural. Whereas if you just put the straw and try to achieve the belt, you're probably not going to be getting the same effect.
I think we can play around with it though. I think again, there's ways. It depends what we mean by belt. But I think that you can play around with trying to feel that feeling of doing it, and then gradually open your mouth up and see if you can retain that feeling. I mean, I think it's interesting. Something I'm going to explore a bit more, because I do use it, the belt, and I do in the vocal gym when we do SOVT Wednesdays, we do a build up exercise where we just blow it on an arpeggio, then we just blow unvocalized, and then we add in a really soft ooh just on it, and then we build it up, and then we try to just absolutely go for it. And you feel this, this full feeling, but it's again it's
so okay, so what's happening here physics wise is you're changing the balance of velocity and therefore pressure. And so if you're singing through the straw a light ooh, the airflow isn't going to be as high as if you're singing as if you're trying to belt the sound through the straw, because you're then constricting more of that energy through that space, which causes a problem. The quicker the air moves through the straw, the greater the resistance will be. So actually it might be that when you're doing through the straw with the ooh, and you want to kind of give it that full whack, you might have to switch out for a straw that is potentially slightly wider or shorter, so that energy spends less time in that tube, and so is able to escape to atmosphere more quickly. So you still get some benefits, but you also afford it the ability to kind of just be a little bit freer. So that might be a consideration.
What about sorry, I'm just jumping in on the question that Sandy has asked, and then Sam kind of quantified, saying that there are loads of SOVT warm-ups online, which are 30, 40 minutes long.
Yeah.
Is how long is too long, Oren?
So a quick note on the ones that you're seeing online, the 40-minute ones, are probably mine, but in collaboration with somebody else. And honestly, it's YouTube algorithm stuff. 40 minutes, I think, is too long for solely working on SOVT. So I would break those down into components. And so you don't just want to do pure SOVT work. You have to mix it and match it with your normal vocal exercises as well. So you're getting a rounded experience. And so I think if you're purely working on strengthening the voice athletically, as if you are kind of, akin to that gym workout, 10 minutes morning, 10 minutes evening. So let's say 20 minutes a day total, but with a decent break in the middle, it's probably good enough for just focusing on SOVT work. If you want to work on the kind of bringing the voice back to normality when it's tired and fatigued, 2 to 5 minutes I would say is probably good. I don't know how long you do, Lydia, when you're working with patients, but I would say 2 to 5 minutes is probably quite a good number.
Yeah, I usually say to people a couple of minutes, a few times, perhaps if I'm using it as a therapeutic thing, a few times through the day, a couple of minutes at a time. I was just answering a load of questions in the Q&A. So I think if you click on answered, oh, hi, Stephen. So yeah, I don't know if it pops up, if it notifies you, but I've tried to answer a few questions. So feel free to have a look at my answers before we end the meeting.
I think as well, I think I can save to the answers, so I will go through them. I can even publish the questions somewhere so that we can go and we can have a look through them, because I think we won't get time to answer them all because it's a huge subject. It's whether part 2 or we can answer your questions, just keep chatting on the group. I think we should probably wrap it up because there's a lot of questions here, and I think that we should, I think what we've taken from this today is that there's not a right and a wrong if it feels comfortable, and if it's working for you, if it feels nice, that's the starting point. And you can play around and you have permission to play around. Don't feel intimidated by this. Allow yourself to experiment with it. There's lots of people, that you can get in touch with to learn more. Go to Oren's website. What I'll do is, I'm not sure where the best place to talk to you all is, other than here, but I know when this ends, you'll lose the chat. But Oren, you can go to his website, you can buy this, and you can play around with it, and it comes with all the instructions. And you've also got courses as well, and Lydia and Stephen King are at the Voice Care Centre, and they're there for all this, for this stuff, and also for massage and SLT. And
yeah, there are a couple of questions on the chat about sort of nodules and cleft palates and stuff, so feel free to get in touch with us through the Voice Care Centre if you have kind of any specific questions about vocal disorders or anything like that. You can get in touch.
Yeah. And if you want to just join the community of the Sing Space, if you're not there at the moment, it's Facebook group, and it's we've got lots of free classes, and we've got a really low cost membership going on at the moment, so you can join the vocal gym and have 20 guided, quite holistic vocal warm-ups with some mindfulness, SOVT, and vocal exploration, which happens
lovely
a month. So, and they're all available as well. So whatever time zone you're in, you can either join us live or just click on and watch them, or you can have full membership, and there's 40 hours worth of classes every month going on at the same space, or just join the Facebook group and then it's free. And there's lots of, we'll pop in at least 2 or 3 free classes every month. So I think, look us all up, get in touch with questions. I'll save the chat, and thanks to everyone for joining us, attendees and
thank you.
Yeah, thank you for setting it up, and sorry I was so dramatically late.
All right, I will end this meeting, but keep blowing bubbles.
Blowing bubbles.
Bye.